Story 1. Story 1, The Descent. The laughter echoed, brittle and forced, across the polished oak table. My cheeks ached from the strained smile. Dinner with the Harpers was always a performance. Richard, with his booming voice and backslapping bonhomie, Martha, all fluttering eyelashes and subtle digs disguised as compliments. Their perfect son, Ethan, a golden retriever of a boy, radiating an unnerving placidity. And then me, the outsider, Sarah, Richard's newly acquired junior partner, desperately trying to fit into their pristine world. Another glass of wine, Sarah? Martha's voice was sugary sweet. Oh, I really shouldn't, I began, but Richard interrupted, filling my glass. Nonsense. Celebrate your success. You've climbed the ladder quickly, haven't you, Sarah? His eyes glinted, a shade too sharp. The room felt suddenly stuffy, the air thick with unspoken expectations. A low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the floorboards. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. The conversation droned on, a blur of stock market fluctuations and golf handicaps. I felt a prickle of unease, a sensation of being watched. I glanced around the room, the polished surfaces reflecting distorted images, like a funhouse mirror. Ethan's placid smile seemed to widen, his eyes fixed on me with unsettling intensity. The humming grew louder, a deep, resonant thrumming that vibrated in my bones. The chandelier above us began to sway slightly, casting flickering shadows across the room. The laughter ceased. Richard and Martha exchanged a look, a silent communication that excluded me. Everything all right, Sarah? Martha's voice was tight, her smile strained. I just feel a bit dizzy, I stammered, clutching the edge of the table. The floor lurched beneath me. A crack appeared on the wall, snaking its way across the pristine wallpaper. The humming intensified, a deafening roar. Screams erupted, but I couldn't tell if they were mine or theirs. Then, the fall. The sensation of dropping, of weightlessness, was terrifying. The polished dining room, the forced smiles, the unsettling hum, all vanished in a rush of cold air and darkness. I flailed, reaching for something, anything, to stop my descent. But there was nothing. I landed with a sickening thud, the impact driving the air from my lungs. I lay there, gasping for breath, the darkness absolute. Slowly, my eyes adjusted, and I could make out the dim outlines of something. It wasn't a room. It wasn't a cellar. It was vast. An endless expanse of nothing. The humming continued, now a low, pulsing drone. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, like jelly. I crawled, my hand scraping against a rough, uneven surface. I couldn't see anything clearly, just shadows that shifted and danced in the periphery of my vision. A faint light flickered in the distance, a pinprick in the vast darkness. I crawled towards it, drawn by the promise of something, anything, other than this void. As I got closer, I could see that the light was coming from a small opening, a crack in the wall? Floor? I couldn't tell. I peered through the crack, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the dining room. The chandelier still swayed gently, casting its flickering light. Richard and Martha were back at the table, their faces composed, sipping their wine. Ethan sat beside them, his placid smile fixed on the empty chair across from him. My chair. They didn't seem to notice the gaping hole in the floor, the chasm that had opened up beneath them. They continued their conversation, their voices muffled, as if coming from a great distance. The laughter echoed, brittle and forced, across the polished oak table. The humming intensified. I pressed my ear against the crack, trying to decipher the words they were saying. Then, I heard it. Martha's voice, clear and sharp. Such a pity about Sarah. Such a fall from grace. Richard chuckled, a low, guttural sound. She simply wasn't one of us. Ethan's smile widened, his eyes gleaming in the flickering light. The humming became a roar. The ground beneath me trembled. I scrambled back from the crack, fear gripping my heart like a vice. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that they knew I was here. They knew I was watching. And they were waiting. The ground began to crumble, the crack widening. I could feel myself slipping, falling again. Into the darkness. Into the nothing. And this time, I knew there would be no bottom. The last thing I saw, before the darkness swallowed me whole, was Ethan's face, his placid smile replaced by something cold, something hungry. The humming faded, replaced by the echo of their laughter, brittle and forced, echoing through the void. Story 2. Story 2, The Descent. It started with a flicker. The fluorescent lights in my cramped office buzzed, casting a sickly yellow glow on the stacks of manuscript pages covering my desk. Rain hammered against the small window, each drop a tiny explosion of white noise against the silence of the late evening. Just finished this chapter, I muttered to myself, the taste of stale coffee bitter on my tongue. Then the floor swayed. Not a dramatic lurch, more like the gentle rocking of a boat. I dismissed it as fatigue. I'd been working for days, fueled by caffeine and the gnawing fear of deadlines. But the swaying continued, subtle yet persistent. I looked up, half expecting to see the potted plant by the window swinging, but it remained still. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I pushed back from my desk, the chair's wheels squeaking against the linoleum. The room tilted, and my stomach lurched. The swaying intensified, becoming a slow, nauseating spin. The wall seemed to breathe, the ceiling lowering, the floor rising to meet it. Panic clenched its icy fingers around my throat. "This isn't happening," I whispered, my voice thin and reedy. I stumbled towards the door, my hands outstretched, searching for purchase on the suddenly fluid reality. The doorknob felt cold and slick beneath my fingers. I twisted it, pulled, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if the frame itself was warping, the metal bending inwards. A low hum vibrated through the floor, up my legs, into the core of my being. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting strobing shadows that danced and writhed across the walls like grotesque puppets. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear something, anything, over the pounding of my heart. Silence. A thick, oppressive silence that swallowed sound and amplified the growing terror in my chest. Then, a voice. Not from outside the door, but from within the room, a whisper close to my ear, so soft I almost didn't hear it. Falling? I whirled around, my eye scanning the shadows, searching for the source of the voice. There was nothing there. Just the flickering lights, the swaying walls, the suffocating silence. But the whisper lingered, a phantom echo in the back of my mind. Falling, falling, falling. The humming intensified, the floor beneath my feet vibrating so violently I could barely stand. Cracks appeared in the walls, spreading like spider webs across the plaster. Dust rained down from the ceiling, coating everything in a fine, grey film. The room was shrinking, contracting around me, crushing me in its relentless descent. Days blurred into a nightmarish eternity. I lost track of time, my only companions the whispering voice and the ever-present sensation of falling. I tried to ration the stale crackers and bottled water I had in my desk drawer, but my stomach churned with a constant nausea, making it impossible to keep anything down. Sleep became a series of fragmented nightmares, filled with distorted images of falling through endless voids, the whispering voice a constant, mocking refrain. One day, I noticed something different. The humming had ceased. The swaying had stopped. The room was still. But the silence was deeper, heavier, more oppressive than before. It pressed against me, suffocating me, a tangible entity. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs weak and trembling. I reached for the doorknob. It turned. The door opened onto not the familiar hallway outside my office, but a vast, empty expanse. A void. An infinite abyss stretching out before me, filled with a swirling, iridescent mist that shimmered and shifted like an oil slick on water. The air was thin and cold, biting at my exposed skin. And there, at the edge of the void, I saw them. Figures. Humanoid in shape, but distorted, elongated, their limbs stretched and twisted into unnatural angles. They stood motionless, silhouetted against the swirling mist, their faces obscured by shadows. But I could feel their eyes on me, cold and vacant, watching me. Waiting. The whispering voice returned, closer now, almost a sigh against my ear. Welcome, home. A single tear rolled down my cheek, freezing against my skin. I looked back at the room, at the familiar mess of papers and books, at the flickering fluorescent lights, at the mundane reality I had known. It seemed so distant, so unreal. A memory fading into the abyss. I took a step forward, into the void. The figures remained motionless, their silent gaze burning into me. The ground beneath my feet dissolved, and I began to fall. Again. The whispering voice followed me, echoing through the emptiness. Falling, falling, falling. And I am still falling. The figures are always there, watching, waiting. And the voice never stops. I don't know where I am falling, or why. I don't know if there is an end. I only know that I am falling, and the fall is eternal. Story 3. Story 3, The Cartographer's Descent. It started with a misplaced Conto line. I remember the precise moment, the way the nib of my pen snagged on the rough grain of the drafting paper, leaving a tremor in the otherwise smooth curve. I was mapping the remote peaks of the Himalayas, a commission from a reclusive collector, a man whose interest in cartography bordered on the obsessive. The region itself was infamous, shrouded in local legends of ancient deities and forbidden valleys. I dismissed them as folklore, of course, the quaint fancies of a superstitious people. Another late night, Eleanor? My landlady, Mrs. DeCole, a stout Nepali woman with perpetually rosy cheeks, placed a steaming cup of chai on my desk. Just finishing this section, I replied, my eyes glued to the offending line. It vibrated, almost imperceptibly, as if mocking my efforts to correct it. This particular mountain range is proving difficult. The mountains have a mind of their own, Mrs. DeCole said, her tone laced with an unnerving knowingness. They don't like to be measured. I chuckled, attributing her words to mountain law. But a chill wormed its way down my spine. I spent the rest of the night trying to reconcile the tremoring line, my frustration mounting. It wasn't just a cartographical error, it felt like a flaw in the fabric of reality itself. The next day, the tremor spread. It wasn't confined to the map anymore. The ground beneath my feet vibrated subtly, the walls of my small Kathmandu apartment seemed to breathe. Sounds, strange and dissonant, echoed from the normally quiet streets, a low hum punctuated by metallic clicks and scrapes. I called my colleague, David, back in London. David, something's happening here. I can't explain it. It's like the landscape itself is unstable. His voice, crackling through the phone line, sounded distant and unconcerned. Eleanor, you're overworked. Take a break. These remote assignments can mess with your head. No, listen to me. I insisted, but he dismissed my concerns as altitude sickness. I slammed the phone down, a wave of nausea washing over me. The humming grew louder, resonating in my bones. Over the next few days, the world around me began to unravel. The mountains outside my window shimmered, their outlines blurring, shifting, becoming impossibly acute, then flattening out, as if some unseen hand were kneading the very rock. The sounds grew more intense, more organized, taking on a rhythmic, almost ritualistic quality. I started seeing things in the periphery of my vision, fleeting glimpses of impossible angles, non-Euclidean architecture jutting out from the familiar cityscape, and shadows that moved independent of any light source. The locals, once friendly and welcoming, now avoided my gaze. Their whispered conversations, laced with a palpable fear I couldn't understand, followed me like a shroud. Mrs. DeCole stopped bringing me chai, leaving my meals outside my door. One night, the humming reached a crescendo. I woke to find my room bathed in a pulsating, violet light. The air crackled with static, my hair standing on end. The contour lines on the map glowed an eerie, phosphorescent green. They writhed and pulsed, rearranging themselves into shapes that defied all known geometry. Driven by a primal fear I couldn't comprehend, I fled. I ran through the deserted streets, the violet light casting long, distorted shadows. The humming, now a deafening roar, seemed to emanate from the mountains themselves. I found myself drawn to the outskirts of the city, towards the foothills of the Himalayas, the very mountains I had been mapping. The ground trembled violently, splitting open in gaping fissures. The violet light intensified, and I saw it then, a vast, swirling vortex of colors I couldn't name, opening up in the sky above the highest peaks. It was a hole in reality, a tear in the fabric of the universe, revealing something vast and ancient beyond human comprehension. The air grew thin, the ground beneath me gave way, and I felt myself falling, not towards the earth, but into that swirling abyss. I saw faces then, swirling within the vortex, grotesque parodies of human features, contorted in expressions of unimaginable ecstasy and agony. The humming transformed into a chorus of voices, whispering, chanting, screaming in a language that resonated deep within my soul, a language that was both utterly alien and disturbingly familiar. The feeling of falling intensified, becoming a sensation of infinite descent, a plunge into an endless, non-Euclidean chasm. The faces pressed closer, their whispers louder, more insistent. They spoke of impossible dimensions, of geometries beyond human understanding, of the true nature of the cosmos, a truth so terrifying that it threatened to shatter my sanity. Then, everything went black. I woke up in my apartment, the morning sun streaming through the window. The map lay on my desk, the contour lines perfectly smooth, the offending tremor gone. The humming had ceased, the violet light vanished. Everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. The mountains outside my window looked different. Subtly different, in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Their angles seemed sharper, their peaks somehow higher. And sometimes, late at night, when the city sleeps, I hear a faint whispering, a distant echo of the voices from the vortex, reminding me of the abyss that awaits, the fall that never truly ended. I fear I'm not back. I fear I never will be.